Audiences have complained about Hollywood's lack of originality for nearly as long as Hollywood has existed. While it seems like adaptations, sequels, and remakes are a modern trend, these types of films have actually existed for and encompass some of the medium's most celebrated classics. Jaws is an adaptation of a novel by Peter Benchley, Bride of Frankenstein helped launch a proto-franchise of Universal Monsters, and one of the most famous and awarded films of all time, Ben-Hur, is not only a remake, but the second remake of the 1907 original. However, we're not going to talk about the 2016 Ben-Hur movie. As Hollywood moves away from originals and tends toward name recognition, every once popular franchise from Ghostbusters to The Lion King to the Friday the 13th, that you could literally be here forever with listing Hollywood horror movie remakes, and these will be resuscitated and revived. Many of these are fine or forgettable, and a few are even surprisingly managed to improve on the original, but time and time again, remakes come out which are either shockingly redundant or even harmful to the legacy of the original. Welcome to Popcorn Programming. Here's our list of the 10 worst movie remakes of all time. Pop pop! In number 10, we have Pinocchio from 2022. We're going for the version directed by Robert Zemeckis, where there was like 5 versions of Pinocchio from 2022, but we're going for the Robert Zemeckis one. Beginning with either Alice in Wonderland in 2010 or Maleficent in 2015, Disney has spent the last decade plus remaking and reimagining their classic animated movies. This is a trend that shows no sign of slowing down, despite the best of these films being met with only lukewarm reviews, and the worst being absolutely reviled by critics and audience and even ruining careers. Hello Renee Zellweger, how are you doing? One of the worst received Disney remakes has been the 2022's Pinocchio movie, a reinvention of one of Disney's most enduring and time-tested classics that managed to sink at the box office despite bringing aboard the likes of Tom Hanks and Ewan McGregor and even having director Robert Zemeckis. The prevailing critique of Disney's remakes is that they fail to bring anything new to the stories that they retell, often coming across as at best nostalgic shadows of their source material, and at worst watered down versions featuring even less content than the originals. Pinocchio is squarely in that latter camp, as the film's attempt to only expand the lore by making Pinocchio an explicit replacement for Geppetto's deceased son falls flat due to the lack of screen time and chemistry between the inventor and his wooden child. Other remakes have some unique draws, whether it be Aladdin shifting the focus to focus a bit more on Jasmine, and Mulan providing a more action-oriented approach, or The Lion King's Disney Earth-esque appeal. Pinocchio offers not only nothing worthwhile, but substantially less than the original film, other than an unsettling visual effects upgrade. All in all, Pinocchio fails to learn that its own morals as the film becomes more focused on external factors such as CGI or the big-name casting, and it loses a sense of heart and moral virtue that made the original, worth watching in the first place. In number 9, we have Psycho from 1997, directed by Gus Van Sant. In a vacuum, Psycho is a good movie. The film features some of the most ingenious pacing and best camera work that has ever been seen in a horror film to date. The only problem is that none of these technical elements were the remake's idea. Gus Van Sant's 1998 horror film is the rare example of a shot-for-shot remake, with nearly 100% of the movie's technical elements a direct recreation of the Alfred Hitchcock masterpiece, down to the second-for-second pacing of the edit. While the original Psycho blew up at the box office and defined Hitchcock's legacy upon its release, the Vince Vaughn starring remake made a measly profit and became a mostly forgotten part of not only Van Sant's legacy, but the history of cinema in general. This approach would be redundant but stylistic if remaking an average film. However, Psycho is one of the rare movies that really holds up to modern cinematic standards, let alone those of 1998. Psycho's lasting and unique visual style is the very thing that made a shot-for-shot remake enticing to Van Sant, but also dooms the film to irrelevance from the start. More than any other remake, even the aforementioned Disney redundancies, Psycho 98 begs the audience to compare it to the original, and it is a matchup that the remake loses in nearly every possible regard. The film was a controversial and attention-grabbing decision at the time, with some seeing it as the only way to properly homage the classic, but as the years have passed and the remake has been faded, it becomes clear that changing something would have at least given the film a purpose, even if it would not have given it quality. In number 8 with The Mummy from 2017, directed by Alex Kurtzman. While not critically acclaimed, the late 90s and early 2000s Mummy movie starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz remain crowd-pleasing fan favourites with being a bit of fun, with the first in particular being one of the more beloved adventure films of the past 30 years. After the disappointing Tomb of the Dragon Empire derailed the franchise for several years, Universal sought to resurrect not only the movie franchise, but also the entire staple of classic monsters in the MCU's dark universe. Unfortunately for all involved, the very film that birthed a new cinematic universe also destroyed it with the 2070s, The Mummy being so universally reviled and disliked, the plans for the nascent franchise were immediately shuttered. While the Brendan Fraser Mummy films were homages to classic adventure films such as Indiana Jones, the Dark Universe version opted for a more militaristic and disaster movie approach, clearly inspired by the very MCU films that it hoped to rival. The Mummy stars Tom Cruise as Nick Morton, a US Army sergeant tasked with stopping the rise of the titular undead villain played by Sophia Boutella. Along the way, Morton is introduced to Russell Crowe as none other than Dr. Henry Jekyll of Heightened fame. Now works in a secret government agency and bears super strength when he transforms into his Hulk-esque alter ego. This Avengers-style world building is harshly contrasted by the film's conflicting desire to return the Mummy to its horror roots. While the films that Fraser was a part of knew what they were and always chose adventure over horror while still managing to deliver both, though scarab beetles are still terrifying, the Dark Universe attempts to simultaneously be a sci-fi spectacle and a spooky throwback. This dichotomy creates a dissonant tone that drags down the already weak storytelling into depths of failure that the Dark Universe would never ever recover from. In number 7 we have 13 Ghosts from 2001. The hilariously named 13 Ghosts, which is spelled THIR, then the number 13 EN Ghosts, which was so universally disliked and ill-regarded upon its release that many do not even recognise that the film was a remake. A mainstay upon rankings of the worst horror movies of all time, the film's shoddy script, cheap production values, poor special effects, and at kindest campy acting have become the stuff of bad movie legend and have made the film a cult classic despite its poor quality. The original film is a novelty for entirely different reasons, however. Directed by William Castle, the original 13 Ghosts was a gimmick-based horror film in which audiences were given the option to watch the film with ghosts visible or invisible via colour-filtered glasses. This original film was not beloved by any means upon release, but its quirky gimmick and its niche among the early ranks of 3D films at least allowed it to provide some enjoyment as a fun house attraction. The rare remake of an already quite bad film, 13 Ghosts strips away any inventive gimmicks and leaves behind just the underlying story and premise. The film's setup was found simplistic by 1960s standards, so by 2001 the film had even less to offer outside of gore and cheap creature design. Tony Shalhoub stars as a paranormal investigator who inherits a haunted mansion and must unravel its mystery. It's the oldest setup in the book, and one that 13 Ghosts has no real spin on outside of a very high-tech looking room filled with glass walls. Shalhoub is underwhelming to say the least as a leading man, and while Matthew Lillard is often praised as the film's lone bright spot, his performance in the film undoubtedly is one of the weaker ones, only appearing bright due to his dismal surroundings. If you want great Matthew Lillard performances, the Scooby-Doo movies will serve you well. Or Scream if you want a horror Elton. In number 6 we have Total Recall from 2012, narrated by Len Wiseman. The original Total Recall is a film bursting at the seams of rich sci-fi concepts, imaginative creature designs, and impressive practical effects. Arnold Schwarzenegger stars in one of his more beloved classics as a man who erases memory and must unravel a sweeping conspiracy theory across a futuristic Mars. The 2012 Total Recall film starring Colin Farrell grounds these inventive aspirations in both a literal sense by transplanting these settings onto a futuristic Earth, and a figurative sense of replacing vibrant designs and colours with bog-standard CGI and concrete palettes. The film tells the story of Farrell's Douglas Quaid, who, upon having his memory erased, finds himself embroiled in a conspiracy theory and becomes a wanted fugitive. In structure and appearances, the film is more in common with Minority Report than Total Recall, and pales in comparison to both films. Unlike most remakes though, Total Recall takes from a very open-ended source material which is ripe for expansion and interpretation, which makes the film's decision to instead dial back everything and generalise itself all the more painful and disappointing. Had this film been released under a separate name, it would have still been an underwhelming action flick that we would still recommend that you skip. Attaching itself to one of the most famed 90s sci-fi movies of all time though, launches Total Recall into the realm of infamy and utter disappointment. In number 5 we have Point Break from 2015, narrated by Erickson Core. The original Point Break is a classic action movie that, despite its silly premise and outrageous plot development, won over audiences with its commitment to making its emotions as big and over the top as its action. The The 1991 film is a melodrama at heart, and actors Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves, as well as director Catherine Bigelow, are not only aware of this, but committed to its overly bombastic and dramatic feeling. Coming out a mere 24 years later, 2015's Point Break saw the intense hyperbole and exaggeration in the original and decided that the very thing that made it a classic was what needed to be fixed. Point Break exercises the electric chemistry that made the original so fun and chooses to put all its eggs into the basket of its inflated modern stunt budget. Admittedly, these new stunt sequences are pretty impressive and in a vacuum may be an improvement on the original. However, without the emotional connection that made the audiences believe the film's premise, viewers begin to question why these stunts exist to begin with. A gang of extreme sports-obsessed criminals is an admittedly outrageous premise, and like so many remakes before it, Point Break fails to understand that the original succeeded by leaning into this hyper-reality instead of denying it. Iconic films become iconic for taking risks with their tone, affording an identity all of their own. 2015, with Point Break, merely wants to try to fit in. And rounding out our trilogy of classic movies that have got terrible remakes, we have RoboCop from 2014, directed by Jose Padilla. Audiences were hesitant about 2014 reboot of RoboCop from the day it was announced. The original film is a bloody, gory satire of rampant capitalism, the increasingly violent justice system and unchecked corporate power. So when it was announced that the reimagined version would be PG-13, viewers rightfully feared that it would be a watered-down version of the beloved classic. Despite the much love for the original and the game cast of Gary Oldman, Michael Keaton, Samuel L. Jackson and Joel Kinnaman, audiences were unfortunately proven correct in their fears when the remake premiered. 2014's RoboCop dialed back not only the iconic violence, but also the overt politics and satire that made the original a classic. The new film attempts to modernize the original themes by making modern comparisons to drone warfare and constant technological supervision, but on the whole it feels so much more focused on presenting sleek, stylish action and making the technocratic future look cool rather than properly alarming. Not only does the film fail to properly grasp the themes of its predecessor, but it also fails to match the action of the original film as well. 2014's RoboCop features a shinier coat of paint, but its action lacks punch, features less inspired set pieces, and overall blends into the generic landscape of mid-2010s action movies. The original stood out in its time for looking and feeling like nothing else before. The remake attempts to be for everyone at once and winds up being for nobody at all. In number 3 with Planet of the Apes from 2001, directed by Tim Burton. Many remakes are awful because they seem redundant or because they turn something that was once unique into something generic. Planet of the Apes re-envisions its source material with broad sweeping changes while simultaneously managing to stick out among its peers. Instead, the film fails on its own merits simply due to an old-fashioned lack of quality. Despite extremely impressive prosthetic makeup, Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes is an otherwise dull film that suffers from drawn-out pacing, an outmatched lead in Mark Wahlberg, and an uninspired plot that lacks both the original film's compelling world-building and its iconic twist. Very little is present in Tim Burton's signature flair or inventiveness outside of some impressive practical effects and a standout supporting cast of Paul Giamatti, Helena Bonham Carter, and Tim Roth, who are wasted on drawn-out flat material. Unlike the latter Planet of the Apes remakes, this 2001 reimagining delves very little into the actual world building and instead presents a fairly basic good versus evil narrative that would be forgotten if not for the primate-themed dressing. The film's boldest swing comes at the very end when Wahlberg's character successfully returns to present-day Earth only to find that history has been rewritten with the apes. Unlike the original film's classic twist, however, this reveal neither ties into the film's themes nor recontextualizes the rest of its events. It simply serves as pure nonsensical shock value. In number 2 we have The Wicker Man from 2006, directed by Neil LaBute. Instead of becoming one of the new millennium's most recognisable so bad it's good movies, Nicolas Cage's The Wicker Man owes its infamous reputation to not only its clumsy dialogue and lead actors' iconic scenery chewing, but to its status as a remake of a once well-regarded horror classic. The Wicker Man sees Cage as a detective who travels to a mysterious island while investigating the disappearance of a missing girl. The film is meant to provide a sense of slow-burning uneasiness and what was meant to be a horrifying ambience instead comes out as a series of strange encounters in what Cage's detective alternates between shocking stupidity or laugh-inducing buffoonery. The original Wicker Man has resonated with audiences for decades as a folk horror classic and the inspiration for modern films such as the acclaimed Midsommar. While the original Wicker Man is worth watching as a chilling horror film, the remake is worth watching for its hard pivot into absolute insanity and zaniness. Highlights include a vision of a semi-truck coming out of nowhere on a boat, Cage parading around punching people in a bear suit, and the iconic meme-worthy scene where the actor is tortured with bees at the film's climax. 2006's Wicker Man overshadows the legacy of a genuinely great horror film to such a degree that the film's title is now more associated with The Room than it is with horror classics. And number 1, we have Rollerball, directed by John McTiernan. The original Rollerball is a campy yet intriguing sci-fi premise, simultaneously focused on a goofy roller derby-esque death sport, alongside hard-hitting critiques of society and capitalism. John McTiernan, the famed director of action classics such as Die Hard and Predator, went into the 2002 Rollerball remake with the goal to replace the original social critique and relevance with even more Rollerball. This decision alone likely would have tanked the film. Rollerblades in general were a lot less futuristic in 2002, but the action reboot quickly became a behind-the-scenes nightmare that resulted in not only one of the worst sci-fi films of all time, but also a prison sentence for McTiernan. As a film itself, however, and not a Hollywood horror story, Rollerball is still terrible. The film features terrible production values, a loose and wandering script that lacks focus without the commentary of the original, and technical issues that persisted into the final cut. One of the film's most infamous sequences is an incomprehensible night vision action scene, existing as it does simply because the original film was too hard to see, and the film was running out of money before it could be reshot. Rollerball is filled with absurd technical mistakes and inefficiencies which turn what already would have been uninspired and watered down remake into one of the worst films of all time. And there you have it, there is our list. So what do you think? What movie remake is the absolute worst? Let us know in the comment section down below. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and click the subscribe button if you're new around here. That's all for now, but thank you for watching, and we'll see you later. Pop pop!